Hi, Belle. Let's talk about net neutrality. Last year, the American government voted to repeal net neutrality, and in the weeks leading up to that moment, there was international fear that if this went through, which by the way it did, it would set an international precedent, and that corporations all over the world would start pressuring governments everywhere to also repeal net neutrality. And within a few days of the official American decision to repeal net neutrality, it came out that net neutrality has actually been under attack for quite some time right here in Canada. And guess who's been leading the charge? Lobbyists hired by Bell. And this really confirms all my suspicions about Bell's Let's Talk Day being a superficial way to mask all of the bad they're actually doing to people with mental illness. Because people with mental illness rely on net neutrality. For many of us, the only survivor communities, the only understanding communities of people who live with mental illness that we've been able to find are online. Our closest friends are online because that's where we find the people who are suffering from the same things we are, who are struggling with the same battles we are, and who are overcoming them. And those communities, they don't have the resources to continue existing if net neutrality is repealed. They can't afford to pay to be on your basic internet package. And most of the people who are in those communities can't afford to pay for it if those communities suddenly become extra add-ons to your internet. They need access to those communities in order to learn coping mechanisms to thrive, and those communities will disappear without net neutrality. And that's only one aspect of how net neutrality is essential to people living with mental illness. Because the other thing is that a lot of people who run the small online businesses that will be most heavily impacted by the repeal of net neutrality are also people who live with mental illness. And often this is because when we are living and struggling with mental illness, it's much easier for us to work online. Many of us have issues either with anxiety around people, or anxiety about the world, or germs, or whatever, or energy level issues because we are struggling with depression, and a lot of us are introverted, so going outside even to work takes a lot out of us. And so we work online, and we've found ways to build online businesses, and maybe not to fully thrive because there's only so much we can do and our businesses are still very small, but to survive in a world that is built against us. Our online businesses are what allow us to take care of ourselves and still put food on the table. And most of us are struggling to pay our bills, and many of us can't even afford the mental health care that we know we need, or if we can, we are barely able to afford it. Our small online businesses have allowed us to survive and be self-sufficient in a world that is built against us, and that has forced people with mental illness to be dependent on relatives or the government for centuries. It gives us the freedom that people with mental illness living in generations past did not have and could not have imagined. It's completely changed our lives and our ability to interact with the world. And all of that goes away if net neutrality is repealed. Because people aren't going to pay to look at a website to think about paying us. And most of us can't afford even $5 or $10 to get onto somebody's basic internet package. We are barely able to put food on the table and pay all of our bills as it is, and maybe if we're lucky also to have fun once in a while. We are already struggling. We cannot afford this extra expense. Our existing hosting to us is expensive enough because we are struggling. Killing net neutrality has a direct negative impact on people living with mental illness. It will ruin our livelihoods, and it will ruin our lives. It will destroy our communities and make it harder for us to tell and share our stories, which is essential if we ever want to break the stigma. So Belle, if you are listening, if you really do want to talk, I urge you to stop fighting against net neutrality and to understand what it does for people living with mental illness, and that if you really want to be our champions, you need to defend net neutrality, not fight against it. Alright, so that is all I have to say about Belle Let's Talk Day and net neutrality. If you enjoyed this video and you're interested in hearing more of my opinions on mental health and tips on how to cope with a mental illness and improve your life, please do subscribe. I post videos every Monday, and I will see you next week.